So hey anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Dr. Stone. This is second part of the series. So let's start the series. The night the moan stopped. The pony cart, once assembled, was a thing of terrifying, ridiculous beauty. Its frame was lashed heartwood, its wheels solid discs of the same iron-hard timber. At its core, wound tighter than a drum, was the massive spring of fossilized ligament, a coiled black serpent of potential energy. It looked less like a vehicle and more like a siege engine crossed with a child's fever dream. Testing it was an exercise in controlled catastrophe. Taiju, being the only one strong enough to both pull it and survive the launch, was the designated driver. The first test, on a flat stretch of riverbank, ended with the cart shooting forward like a stone from a sling, launching Taiju and his passenger, a shrieking, delighted Chrome, 20 yards before the spring unwound completely and the whole contraption slewed sideways, throwing them both into the mud in a tangle of limbs and laughter. But it worked. The burst of speed was shocking, covering 30 yards in under 3 seconds, a distance that would take a sprinting warrior 5 or 6, right into the kill zone of any archers. Fine-tuning. Senku barked, scribbling notes on a clay slab. We need a braking mechanism. And steering. Primitive, but necessary. As they labored, a subtle, unsettling change occurred in the world around them. The moaning stopped. For weeks, the low, hungry sound from the deep woods had been as constant as the river's rush or the wind in the trees, a background hum of wrongness they'd learned to tune out. Its absence was more deafening than the sound had ever been. The silence that replaced it was profound, watchful, and thick with dread. It wasn't peace. It was the quiet of a predator that has finished stalking and is now poised to spring. The kingdom grew jumpy. Sentries scanned the tree line until their eyes ached. Conversations were held in hushed tones. The rhythmic whoosh-clunk of the bellows now sounded horribly loud, a beacon in the silent world. Senku called an emergency council, his face grim. The cessation of auditory phenomena associated with the unknown fauna suggests a behavioral shift. Possibly migration, but more likely a reaction to a larger stimulus. Tsukasa's approach is the most probable catalyst. The local ecosystem is clearing the stage. Kahaku, returned from a wide scouting circuit, confirmed it. The forest is empty. No birdsong where there was some. No rustling in the underbrush. Even the insects are quiet. It is like the land itself is holding its breath. They're coming, Naruto stated, the certainty cold in his gut. Soon. And they're not sneaking this time. They're making the world afraid for them. Final preparations took on a frantic, desperate edge. The pony cart was fitted with crude wooden brakes, leather pads that could be levered against the wheels. Steering was accomplished by the passenger leaning their weight. It was ludicrous, but it was the best they had. Naruto spent his time not on grand strategies, but on minutiae. He helped Uzuriya sew extra leather padding into tunics, a pathetic defense against metal weapons. He helped Chrome stockpile fist-sized stones for their slingshots next to piles of the small, fuse-lit pottery bombs. He walked the perimeter with Kahaku, identifying the best spots for ambush, for retreat, for a last stand. His own preparation was internal. He sat for hours, eyes closed, not trying to expand his chakra, but to cleanse it. He would draw a tiny bit of the stagnant, petrified energy from the cold cyst in his gut, hold it in his mental grasp, and then, focusing on the memory of ramen steam, of Hinata's laugh, of Boruto's eye roll, he would try to burn it away with the sheer, stubborn heat of his own will. It was like trying to melt a glacier with a candle. The cold resisted, seeped back. But he felt like he was carving a small, warm space within himself, a fortress against the chill. He was preparing not just to use the stasis, but to survive using it. 3 days after the moan stopped, the attack came. It did not come at dusk, as Kahaku predicted. It came in the dead of night, under a moonless, starless sky so black it felt like a suffocating blanket. The first warning was not sight or sound, but smell. A shift in the wind, carrying the scent of unwashed bodies, cold metal, and a faint, coppery tang of blood. Naruto, on watch high on the southern bluff, caught it first. He didn't shout. He flung a prearranged signal, a small, fuse-less pottery bomb that cracked loudly against a rock. The kingdom erupted into silent, rehearsed action. Figures moved in the dark, taking positions. Taiju and Chrome manned the pony cart, hidden in a gully near the main entrance. Kahaku vanished into the shadows of the cliffs. Senku, from his command nook, had a clear line of sight to the flash powder charges. They waited. The enemy did not charge. They emerged from the tree line as a solid, silent wall. Torches were lit, not for light, their eyes were adjusted to the dark, but for terror. Dozens of flames flickered, illuminating grim, young faces and glinting metal spearheads. At the center stood Hyuga, his mace a black silhouette against the torchlight. Maz stood beside him, her staff in hand. And Tsukasa. Tsukasa was not there. Naruto's blood ran cold. A feint? Or was the real threat already inside their perimeter? Where is your leader? Hyuga's voice boomed across the gap, harsh and mocking. Where is the science heretic? Send him out, and we will be merciful. Only he must die. Senku's voice, amplified by a crude clay megaphone, rang out from his nook, steady and clear. Sorry, but the kingdom of science doesn't negotiate with brute force algorithms. Your request is denied, 10 billion%. Hyoga's answer was a raised fist. The front line of warriors dropped into crouches. The second line, behind them, raised not spears, but slings. Maz had been busy. Shields. Kahaku's voice screamed from the darkness. From behind the rocky barricades, the defenders raised large, rectangular slabs of bark lashed to frames. Not a moment too soon. THWIP, THWIP, THWIP. A hail of rounded river stones, propelled by heavy slings, hammered into the bark shields. The sound was like a sudden, violent hailstorm. Shields splintered. Men and women cried out as impacts jarred arms and shoulders. Now, Chrome! Senku yelled. From the ledges, Chrome and his team let loose. Their slingshots were lighter, their ammunition smaller. But their ammunition was the fist-sized pottery bombs, fuses lit. The small, smoking spheres arced through the night. They landed amidst the front ranks of Tsukasa's army. Pop bang crack. The night lit up with small, sharp flashes. Smoke billowed. Cries of pain and surprise replaced the disciplined silence. The fragmentation was minimal, but the shock and confusion were real. The wall of warriors wavered. Advance! Hyoga roared, unfazed. The discipline line broke into a charge, scrambling over their own disoriented comrades. They hit the first line of defenses, a trench filled with sharpened stakes, hidden by brush. More cries. The charge slowed, funneled into the narrow kill zone of the river gorge. Flash now! Senku commanded. He focused his lens on the central, largest flash powder charge, hidden in the gorge mouth. Thwomp! The silent, blinding white light was even more effective in the pitch dark. The charging warriors, their night-adapted eyes wide open, were completely blinded. They stumbled, crashed into each other, the charge dissolving into a milling, panicked mob. Taiju! Go! 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 Senku's voice was raw. From the gully, there was a sound like a giant twang being released, followed by a terrifying, rattling whoosh. The pony cart, with Taiju pulling in Chrome as passenger, shot out of the darkness like a bolt from a crossbow. It crossed the 50 yards of open ground in a blur, its spring-unwinding scream cutting through the chaos. It slammed directly into the heart of the blinded, confused mass at the gorge entrance. The impact was catastrophic. The heavy heartwood frame plowed through bodies. Chrome, standing braced in the cart, hurled two of the larger, impact fuse bombs into the densest part of the crowd as they passed. Kaboom! Kaboom! Two deeper, deadlier explosions tore through the night. The screams that followed were not of confusion, but of agony. The pony cart, its spring spent, crashed to a halt just past the enemy line, its occupants dazed but alive amidst the carnage they'd wrought. The initial assault was shattered. A ragged cheer started among the defenders. They had done it. They had broken the charge. But Naruto, watching from the bluff, felt no elation. Where was Tsukasa? This was too straightforward. Too much like the last time, just bigger. Tsukasa learned. He adapted. Then he saw it. Movement on the river. In the black water, dark shapes were moving, silent as seals. They weren't crossing at the gorge. They were swimming upstream, past the defenses, using the river itself as a road. A flanking maneuver. Led by Maz, no doubt. Clever. Deadly. The river. Naruto bellowed, his voice carrying over the din flank on the river. Kahaku, from her perch, saw it too. She blew a sharp, piercing note on a bone whistle, the signal for the river defense team. A handful of defenders scrambled to the riverbank, but they were too few, too late. Maz and a dozen elite warriors were already climbing onto the bank inside the perimeter, wet and silent, their weapons drawn. They would roll up the defense from within. Naruto didn't think. He leaped from the bluff, not toward the river, but toward the command nook. He landed in a roll beside Senku. They're inside. Maz. I'm going. Senku, his face pale but focused, nodded. Go. We'll hold here. Naruto turned and ran, not toward the sounds of the main battle, but toward the silent, deadly infiltration in the heart of his village. He moved with the body flicker, a short, draining burst that covered the distance to the first huts in a blink. He arrived just as Maz's warriors fanned out, aiming for the storage huts, the lab, the cave where the non-combatants hid. Maz saw him. Her eyes, cold and intelligent in the reflected torchlight from the distant gorge, narrowed. The anomaly, she said. Tsukasa-sama will be pleased I can deliver you. She didn't attack him. She signaled to two of her warriors. They broke off and charged him, their metal spears gleaming. Naruto met them head-on. No clones. No wind release. Just the body Kahaku had helped him rebuild and the mind of a shinobi who had fought a war. He ducked under the first spear thrust, feeling the wind of its passage. He grabbed the shaft, used the man's momentum to pull him off balance, and drove his iron knife up under his ribs. The man gasped, crumpling. The second warrior was more cautious, circling. From the corner of his eye, Naruto saw Maz herself heading for the lab hut, where Senku kept his notes, his formulas, the very soul of their science. No. He feinted left, then dropped low, sweeping the warrior's legs. As the man fell, Naruto stamped on his spear arm, hearing the bone snap, then silenced him with a quick, brutal strike. He didn't have time for mercy. He sprinted after Maz. She was at the door of the lab hut, about to enter. "Hey," he shouted. She turned, her staff whipping around in a low arc aimed at his knees. He jumped, but she was ready, reversing the staff's momentum into a thrust at his chest. He twisted, the metal tip grazing his leather-padded side. It was like being punched by a horse. The breath left his lungs. She was good. Incredibly good. Her style was fluid, pragmatic, devoid of flash, the style of a survivor. He fell back on taijutsu, the basic Konoha style, blocking, striking, looking for an opening. But she was faster, her staff giving her reach. A blow to his shoulder made his arm go numb. A glancing hit to his head made lights dance in his vision. He was losing. And with every second, the main battle at the gorge would turn. Hyuga would recover. Their forces would be overwhelmed. He had no chakra for a finishing move. He had only the cold. As her staff came in for another thrust, he didn't block. He let it come. At the last second, he sidestepped, not fully, letting the tip dig into the meat of his left shoulder. Pain, white and hot, lanced through him. But it closed the distance. His right hand shot out, not with a knife, but palm open. He didn't aim for her body. He aimed for the air directly in front of her face. He unleashed the stasis. Not a thread. A wave. A sphere of deadened air, a foot in diameter, engulfed her head. The effect was immediate and grotesque. Her fierce, intelligent eyes widened, then, slowed. The blink of her eyelids became a languid, creeping descent. Her expression of focused aggression froze into a waxen mask. Her body, driven by momentum, tried to follow through, but the signals from her brain were wading through tar. She stumbled, the staff dropping from suddenly clumsy fingers. She was trapped in a bubble of thickened time, her mind screaming inside a skull that had become a prison of cold molasses. Naruto didn't wait. He drove his forehead into the bridge of her nose. It was a brutal, ugly move. He felt cartilage crunch. She fell backwards, the stasis field collapsing as she lost consciousness. She lay still in the dirt, her face a bloody mess, breathing in slow, ragged drags. He stood over her, panting, the cold from the stasis usage washing back into him, mingling with the fiery pain in his shoulder. He felt sick. He had used the rot. He had won with it. The sound of the main battle was changing. The initial panic from the pony cart and bombs had worn off. Hyuga's voice was booming again, rallying. The defenders were being pushed back. He left Maz lying there and ran toward the gorge, his left arm hanging useless. He had to get to Hyuga. He had to end this. As he reached the edge of the main fight, he saw it. The defenders were falling back to the final barricade. Taiju was battling Hyuga directly, but he was being driven back step by step, his own strength no match for the mace and Hyuga's brutal skill. Chrome was on the ground, clutching a bleeding leg. Kahaku was a darting fury, but she couldn't get past Hyuga's guard to a vital spot. Naruto looked for Senku. He saw him, in his command nook, but he wasn't watching the battle. He was staring, horrified, at the sky. Naruto followed his gaze. Above them, blotting out the terrible blackness, was a light. A soft, familiar, sickly greenish silvery light. It was gathering, coalescing like luminous fog, directly over the battlefield. The Y-Man. It wasn't a moan in the forest. It was this. And it was here. The petrification beam was coming. And it was aimed at all of them. The green silence. Time didn't slow. It crystallized. The soft green light descending from the void wasn't a beam, it was a tide, a slow, inexorable pour of liquid silence. It didn't scream, it hushed. The roar of battle, Hyuga's bellow, the clash of weapons, the cries of pain muffled, then faded into a cottony nothingness. It was the sound of the world being muted. Naruto's eyes locked on the light. It was the same. The exact, soul-scarring hue from the vortex that had torn him from Konoha. The origin point. The cause of it all. Why man? Panic, cold and absolute, seized the battlefield below. Tsukasa's warriors and the kingdom's defenders alike froze, staring upward, their conflict forgotten in the face of the ultimate reset button. Hyoga lowered his mace, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. Taiju stumbled back, shielding his eyes. Kahaku stood rigid, spear half-lowered, her hunter's instincts useless against this. Only Senku, in his command nook, was moving. He was frantically rummaging through a clay pot, his movements jerky with a fear Naruto had never seen in him. Naruto's mind, trained for split-second survival, scrabbled for a solution. A barrier? His chakra was a guttering candle against the sun. Evacuation? Impossible. The light was too wide, too encompassing. His gaze snapped to Senku. The scientist pulled out a small, dark object, a lump of the purest, densest charcoal they'd made, wrapped in oiled hide. He struck a flint against his iron knife, sparks flying. He was trying to make a signal fire? A distraction? No. He was looking at Naruto, his eyes wide with a desperate, insane hope. He pointed at the charcoal, then at Naruto, then jabbed his finger violently toward the sky. The message was clear, insane, and the only one they had: burn it. Use your wind. Burn the sky. The logic was catastrophic. If the petrification was an energy wave, perhaps a concentrated, opposing energy burst could disrupt it. A candle against the sun. But a candle held in a hurricane. Naruto didn't hesitate. He leaped, not away, but toward the center of the clearing, directly under the growing nexus of green light. The pain in his shoulder was a distant throb. He landed beside the central fire pit, its coals glowing a sullen red. Everyone! Close your eyes, he roared, his voice strangely flat in the thickening silence. He didn't know if it would help. He didn't know if anything would. He grabbed a burning brand from the fire. He knelt, thrust it into the pile of dry tinder and wood beside the pit. Flames leaped up, hungry and orange, a defiant, living color against the dead green above. He dropped the brand. He placed his hands on either side of the fledgling blaze. He closed his own eyes. He didn't reach for the feeble well of his personal chakra. He went deeper, to the cold, heavy cyst of petrified energy lodged in his gut. The stolen stillness. The weapon he hated. He didn't try to burn it away this time. He embraced it. He let its cold resonance fill him, not to project stasis, but to understand the frequency of the green light. To match it. To become, for a moment, a part of the petrifying wave. Then, he inverted it. He took all his will, all his memories of heat and life, ramen broth bubbling, Hinata's warm hand, the scorching sun over Konoha's training grounds, the searing heat of the furnace, and he forced it into the cold frequency. He created a harmonic dissonance, a scream of heat inside the song of stillness. He channeled it all, every scrap, into his wind affinity. Not a cutting gale. Not a focused blast. A wave of scorching will. He opened his eyes and his mouth, and from his hands and his being, he unleashed not wind, but a visible, roaring plume of gold-tinged orange fire. It wasn't perfect fire release, he had no affinity for it. It was superheated, chakra-impelled air, a blasphemy against nature, forced into existence by sheer, desperate contradiction. It tore from him in a spiraling column, wider than he was tall, and hit the heart of the campfire. The fire didn't just grow. It exploded. Who? A pillar of flame 30 feet high erupted into the night, a roaring, twisting inferno of gold and white heat. It hit the descending green tide. The interaction was not an explosion. It was a terrible, silent cancellation. Where the furious orange fire met the soft green light, the light curdled. It recoiled, not like a solid, but like a living oil slick repelled by soap. A deafening, high-pitched scream, a sound of rending reality, not audible to the ear but felt in the teeth and bones, ripped through the air. The green light above the flame swirled, darkened, and shattered into a million fading emerald motes, like a stained glass window blown apart. But the petrification wave was vast. Naruto's defiant pillar was a pinprick. The green tide flowed around it, continuing its descent on the rest of the battlefield. Yet, in that tiny, cancelled zone, something else happened. The backlash of energies, the petrification stasis in Naruto's violent anti-stasis, created a shockwave of pure, chaotic force. An invisible ring of concussive pressure blasted outward from the fire pillar. It hit Naruto first. It felt like being struck by a mountain made of sound. It lifted him off his feet and threw him backwards through the air. He crashed into the wall of Senku's command nook, the world dissolving into white pain and ringing silence. It hit the others. Warriors from both sides were knocked off their feet like tenpins. The pony cart was flipped onto its side. The shockwave ripped through the gorge, a silent thunderclap of distorted physics. And then, it was over. The green light finished its descent. It touched the earth. But it didn't petrify. Where it touched, in a radius of about 50 yards centered on Naruto's disrupted point, the effect was altered. The grass didn't turn to stone. It turned a uniform, dull gray and became brittle, collapsing into dust at the slightest touch. The wood of the huts didn't mineralize, it desiccated into something resembling ancient, rotten paper. A Tsukasa warrior, caught in the edge of the altered zone, screamed as his metal spearhead rusted into flakes in his hands and the leather of his tunic crumbled to ash, leaving him naked and unharmed but screaming in existential terror. The petrification wave had been corrupted. In that zone, it had become a wave of instant decay. Outside the zone, the true petrification took hold. Several of Tsukasa's warriors, at the far edges of the battlefield, were caught in the untouched green radiance. Their screams were cut off as they hardened into statues of silent horror, their weapons forever raised. The majority of the battlefield, however, lay in between, stunned, deafened, but flesh and blood. The main force of the wave had been dissipated, disrupted by Naruto's impossible counterblast. The silence that followed was absolute. No moans. No battle cries. Just the crackle of the still burning, now unnaturally tall fire pillar, and the soft, sickening puff of grey dust as something else crumbled in the decay zone. Naruto pushed himself up from the rubble of the command nook wall. His body was one massive bruise. His chakra reserves were a smoking crater. The cold cyst in his gut felt seared, smaller, but hotter, a piece of slag now. He tasted blood and ashes. He looked out. The battlefield was a scene of surreal nightmare. Statues here. Piles of dust there. And in the middle, dazed, unharmed humans from both sides, staring at each other and the evidence of an apocalypse barely averted. Hyoga was getting to his feet, his mace lying beside him. He looked at his own hands, then at the petrified form of one of his elite warriors, frozen mid-charge. His face, always so coldly certain, was blank with shock. Kahaku was already moving, checking on Taiju, who was sitting up, blinking dazedly, and Chrome. Senku was crawling out of his nook, his face smudged, one of his precious clay tablets shattered in his hand. And Tsukasa? Naruto's eyes found him. He stood at the very tree line, just outside the range of any effect. He had watched it all. His serene mask was finally broken. His eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a profound, earth-shattering revelation. He wasn't looking at the petrified men or the decay. He was staring at Naruto, who was slowly, painfully, rising from the wreckage. In that look, Naruto saw the death of a philosophy. Tsukasa's entire worldview was built on the petrification as a divine reset, a cleansing judgment on a corrupt old world that relied on tools and technology. It was pure, it was natural, it was final. And Naruto Uzumaki, a relic of that old world wielding its strangest power, had just punched a hole in it. He had not just defended against the divine judgment, he had tainted it, turned it into something even more horrifying and unpredictable. He had proven, unequivocally, that the old world's corrupt ingenuity could not only resist the reset but could warp its very nature. Tsukasa's gaze held no hatred in that moment. It held the terrifying void of a man whose god has just been proven false. Then, the void filled with a new, chilling purpose. If the petrification was not an absolute, inscrutable force, then it was just another power. And power could be taken. Controlled. And the key to defying it, perhaps even wielding it, was standing right there, bleeding and exhausted. Hyoga, Tsukasa's voice cut through the ringing silence. It was calm again, but with a new, metallic edge. Withdraw. Gather our wounded. Leave the transformed. He didn't look at his petrified men. They were now just scenery. His eyes remained locked on Naruto. This changes nothing about the corruption of the old world, he announced, his voice carrying to all. It only reveals its true, monstrous depth. We will return. For the future. And for the key. With that, he turned and melted into the forest. Hyoga, after a last, long look at the bizarre battlefield, gave a sharp whistle. The remaining Tsukasa warriors, shaken and terrified, began a ragged, hurried retreat, carrying their wounded, leaving their stone comrades and the eerie decay zone behind. No one pursued. The kingdom of science was victorious, but it was a victory that felt like a loss. They stood amidst a garden of new horrors they had accidentally cultivated. Senku stumbled over to Naruto, his scientific curiosity battling sheer trauma. The energy interaction, you didn't counter it. You hybridized it. You created a localized field of accelerated entropic decay. The petrification is a suspension of time, and you introduced a violent temporal acceleration. The theoretical implications are. Senku, Kahaku said quietly, arriving beside them. She was bleeding from a cut on her temple, her spear stained. She looked from the decayed patch of earth to Naruto's battered form. Later. Naruto finally looked away from the tree line where Tsukasa had vanished. He looked at his hands. They were blistered from the heat of his own impossible attack. He had done it. He had saved them from petrification. By creating something arguably worse. He had looked into the heart of the world's ending, and he had answered back with a scream of fire that bred rot. In the deep, silent void within him, the cold ember that was Kurama's dormant presence didn't pulse. It quaked. It was no longer just dreaming of the petrification. It had felt Naruto's defiance, his corruption of the curse. And in that quake, for the first time, Naruto felt something from it besides emptiness. He felt a single, reverberating note of recognition. The Garden of Dust and Stone. Victory, in the cold light of dawn, looked like a blasphemy against nature. The battlefield was a scar of contradictions. On one flank stood 3 petrified warriors of the Tsukasa Empire, captured in poses of violent momentum, their stone faces etched with a final, silent scream. On the other, a roughly circular area of blight where Naruto's desperate fire had corrupted the green light. Here, the ground wasn't stone, but a fine, dead gray powder that puffed into the air with every footstep. A discarded leather waterskin lay not petrified, but desiccated into something resembling ancient, crumbly bark. It was a place where time had not stopped, but had raced forward to a dry, utter conclusion. The kingdom of science moved through the aftermath with the quiet, shell-shocked reverence of grave robbers. They collected their wounded, Chrome's leg needed setting, several had concussions from the shockwave, Naruto's shoulder was dislocated and badly burned. They also, on Senku's grim order, collected the Tsukasa wounded who had been left behind. They were enemies, but leaving them to the horrors of the silent forest or the creeping decay felt like a step toward becoming Tsukasa themselves. Naruto sat on a log near the central fire, now just embers, as Yuzuriha carefully wrapped his shoulder with clean hides. The pain was a bright, clarifying fire, better than the hollow, icy ache that had settled in his bones after using the corrupted stasis. Kahaku stood nearby, sharpening her spear with a methodical, almost angry intensity, the shhhk of stone on iron the only sound she seemed willing to make. Senku approached, his usual manic energy replaced by a deep, vibrating intensity. He held a clay bowl. In it was a sample of the gray dust from the decay zone. Initial analysis, he said, his voice low. It's not ash. It's not mineral. It's ultrafine particulate of the original material, after its molecular bonds have been subjected to catastrophic temporal acceleration. Essentially, it's instant millennia of decomposition. You didn't just disrupt the petrification, Naruto. You created its thermodynamic opposite. A zone of hyperentropy. Naruto stared at the innocuous-looking powder. Is it safe? Unknown. It's inert now. But the energy signature that created it was a hybrid of your chakra and the petrification wave. It's a new state of matter for this world. We need to cordon it off. Study it. He looked at Naruto, his eyes serious. And we need to understand what you did. Exactly. The how is our only defense or weapon against a repeat. The how was a knot of pain, instinct, and forbidden energy Naruto didn't want to unravel. He touched the petrification's frequency and screamed his own life into it until it broke. He had no desire to do it again. Over the next few days, a grim routine set in. The decay zone was marked with a ring of painted stones, a scientific quarantine. The petrified Tsukasa warriors were left untouched, stark reminders at the edge of the clearing. The captured enemy wounded, once stabilized, were kept under guard in a separate hut. Among them was Maz, her face a swollen, bruised mess, one eye still shut. She said nothing, only watched with her one good eye, intelligence burning behind the pain. Naruto's recovery was slow. The physical wounds healed, aided by his chakra's stubborn resilience. But the metaphysical cost lingered. The cyst of cold energy was smaller, but it felt volatile, like a sliver of green glass in his gut. His dreams were plagued not by the fox's growls, but by a profound, aching silence, and the image of green light curdling into decay under his golden fire. It was during this uneasy peace that the first scout from the outside world arrived. He was a young man, lean and scared, dressed in patched furs. He carried no weapon but a walking stick, and he approached the kingdom's perimeter not with aggression, but with desperate, waving gestures of surrender. Kahaku brought him in. His name was Ruri, and he was from a small, hidden settlement of survivors a week's travel to the south, a place called the Lamentation Hamlet. They had avoided Tsukasa's notice by being too small, too poor. But they'd seen the green light in the sky, the night the moans stopped. And then, new horrors had come. The quiet things, they are moving, Ruri said, his hands trembling as he accepted a cup of water. The stone in the forest, it is not all sleeping. Some of it walks. He described creatures of living stone, slow but implacable, emerging from the deepest petrified groves. They were indifferent to humans unless approached, but they were changing the landscape, felling petrified trees with their stone hands, gathering chunks of mineral in strange piles. And other things, he whispered, things of shifting shadow and the sound of grinding gravel, that came in the absolute dark and took people who strayed too far. The Y-man's light, it woke them up. Or made them hungry. Senku listened, his scientific mind cataloging. The petrification energy is not uniform. Variations in the wave, or in the material it struck, could create different states. Some total stasis. Some low-level awareness. Or the energy itself could be coalescing into pseudo-life forms. This is a watershed event. The petrified world is entering a new, active phase. For Naruto, it was another layer of dread. They weren't just fighting Tsukasa for the future. They were living in a world that was itself becoming a monster. A few days later, Chrome, his leg propped up, called Naruto over to the lab hut. He had a contraption made of stretched hide, bamboo, and copper wire. A sound catcher, he explained gruffly. Senku's design. You talk into this end, it makes the hide vibrate, the vibration travels along the wire, we can hear things far away if we put the listening cup to our ear. I was trying to listen to the decay zone. 4. Activity. He hesitated. I heard something else. From the forest. Not a moan. A voice. But wrong. Intrigued and uneasy, Naruto took the crude stethoscope-like device. He and Chrome crept to the edge of the tree line, away from the settlement. Chrome pointed the hide diaphragm toward the deep woods. Naruto placed the listening cup to his ear. At first, just the rustle of leaves. Then, beneath it, a sound. It was indeed a voice, or a chorus of voices, dragged through gravel and static. It was slow, mournful, repeating a phrase with the endless patience of stone. Why, man? It was not a question. It was a statement. A name. An identity, worn down by millennia into a grinding lament. The Why Man. It wasn't just a force. It had a voice. And it was speaking. Naruto pulled the device away, a chill that had nothing to do with his internal cold slithering down his spine. The enemy had a name, and it was bored, and it was sad, and it was everywhere. When he reported this to Senku, the scientist's face lost all color. Auditory phenomena associated with the petrification source. This isn't just physics. This is psychology. A consciousness, or the echo of one, imprinted on the energy field. He looked at Naruto, a haunted understanding in his eyes. When you fought it, you didn't just disrupt an energy wave. You answered a call. You may have drawn its direct attention. The weight of that settled on the kingdom like a physical fog. They were no longer hidden. The final straw came from Maz Kahaku, who had taken on the duty of watching the prisoners, reported a change in her. The strategist had recovered enough to sit up. She no longer stared blankly. She watched the comings and goings of the kingdom, and a strange, calculating light had returned to her unswollen eye. Kahaku brought her daily water. One day, as Kahaku turned to leave, Maz spoke, her voice raspy from disuse and injury. He will come for the key. Kahaku stopped. What key? Maz's lips curled in a painful, knowing smile. The one who bends the light. Tsukasa-sama's world was one of pure strength, cleansed by a divine force. Now he has seen that force broken by a remnant of the old corruption. His dream is shattered. So he will take the thing that shattered it. He will take the shinobi, and he will learn how to break the world himself, so he can remake it as he sees fit. Not by the will of a god, but by his own hand. She looked directly at Kahaku. He will burn your village to dust and stone to get him. And he will not test next time. He will drown you in bodies if he must. The message delivered, Maz turned her face to the wall. That night, Naruto found Kahaku on the southern bluff again, but she wasn't watching for enemies. She was staring at the stars, her profile sharp and troubled. She's right, you know, Naruto said, coming to stand beside her. I'm a liability now. More than a weapon. I'm a target that will get everyone here killed. Kahaku didn't look at him. So your solution is to leave? To draw him away? It's a strategy. It is a stupid strategy, she snapped, finally turning. Her eyes blazed in the starlight. You are not a piece on a board to be sacrificed. You are of this village. Your strength is our strength. Your danger is our danger. We face it together. That is what a village is. Her voice wavered, just for a second, with a ferocity that went beyond tactical concern. Or would your old village, your Konoha, have sent its Hokage away because he was too tempting a target? Her words struck him like a physical blow. He thought of the third, facing Orochimaru alone on the roof. Of Minato, sealing the fox within him. Of himself, standing before pain. Konoha's answer was never to send the target away. It was to stand with them, to be the shield. He was silent for a long time. The vast, silent forest stretched before them, a kingdom of stone and whispers. Somewhere in it, Tsukasa was plotting. Somewhere deeper, the Why Man lamented. And here, in this fragile pocket of warmth and noise, was a girl with a spear telling him he belonged. Okay, he said softly. No stupid strategies. She nodded, once, sharply, and turned back to the view. But her shoulder brushed against his, a solid, reassuring point of contact in the immense, hungry dark. Later, in the deep of the night, as he lay trying to sleep, the void within him stirred again. Not a pulse or a quake. This time, it was a sensation. A pressure, as of a great weight shifting in its sleep. And with it, a single, clear, alien thought image, not in words, but in feeling. A green field, infinite and still. A single, golden flame, small but defiant, burning a black spot of rot into the perfect, frozen green. And from the center of the rot, a single, red eye, slit-pupilled like a cat's, opening. It was Kurama. And he was not just dreaming anymore. He was observing. Chapter 13. The Forge of Will. The pressure in the void became a constant, low-grade hum, the psychic equivalent of a sleeping giant's breath. Kurama was not back, not in the way of rumbling conversations and shared chakra. It was a presence, a vast, slumbering awareness that had turned one red, slit-pupilled eye toward the nightmare Naruto was living. It watched, it assessed, and its silent observation was more unnerving than its past rage. Naruto tried to ignore it. He had more immediate problems. Tsukasa's threat was a storm on the horizon, but the petrified world itself was becoming a daily terror. Patrols reported new anomalies, patches of forest where the stone had a faint, sickly bioluminescence, petrified streams that now oozed a viscous, mercury-like fluid that hardened into razor-sharp filaments if touched. The grave crickets from the bog were being sighted closer to the river, their chitinous bodies clicking in the underbrush. The world was sick, and the fever was breaking in strange, malignant ways. Senku, however, saw opportunity in the malignancy. The mercury fluid. It's a liquid metal at ambient temperature. An amalgam, possibly with unique conductive or refractive properties. And the glowing stone, low-level radioactive decay, or stored photonic energy from the petrification event? The data is unprecedented. It's also deadly, Kahaku reminded him flatly, after a hunter returned with a hand lacerated by the hardened filaments. We are not here to collect curiosities. We are here to survive. Survival is data collection. Senku fired back, but his fervor was tempered. He turned his ruthless logic to their most pressing need, making Naruto something more than a brittle, self-harming weapon. He called it Project Shinobi Optimization. It was not about increasing Naruto's chakra that well was still pathetically shallow and now tainted. It was about efficiency. About turning every drop of energy into a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer. Your fighting style is a relic, Senku declared, standing before a clay tablet covered in biomechanical diagrams. It was built for a body and an energy source you no longer have. We must rebuild it from first principles. Kahaku's teachings are the foundation: economy of motion, use of terrain. But we add layers. The first layer was the kit. Senku, Kaseki, and Chrome became a bizarre think tank. They analyzed every tool Naruto had ever described: kunai, shuriken, explosive tags, smoke bombs, wire. Kunai are inefficient for throwing, Chrome argued, sketching. Poor aerodynamics. A balanced, leaf-shaped iron blade would fly truer. But a kunai is also a digging tool, a piton, a lever, Naruto countered. So we make a modular head. Senku's eyes lit up. A sturdy, multi-purpose handle. Interchangeable heads, a balanced blade for throwing, a wedge for prying, a hook for climbing. Kaseki set to work at the forge, the clang-clang of iron becoming the soundtrack to their theory. Shuriken were deemed useful for area denial but a waste of metal. They devised molds to cast sharp, four-pointed stars from the plentiful, brittle iron slag byproduct of the forge, disposable caltrops. Explosive tags were impossible without paper and precise ink seals. But the pottery bomb technology was evolving. They developed smaller, egg-sized versions with a simple friction ignition patch, scratch against rock to arm, throw on impact. Naruto dubbed them flashbangs, though their flash was more of a puff of smoke and a sharp crack. The second layer was the body. Kahaku's training intensified, but now with a scientific bent. Senku used charcoal to draw optimal striking angles on the training dummies. He calculated the most efficient way to fall, to roll, to recover. He had Naruto run obstacle courses not just for speed, but to burn the least calories per meter. It was grueling, analytical, and incredibly boring until it saved his life. During a patrol, a grave cricket, larger than any they'd seen, launched itself from a petrified log. Before Naruto could think, his body, drilled to exhaustion, executed Senku's optimal evasion maneuver number 3, a drop and roll that positioned him perfectly to drive his new modular knife, blade head attached, up through the creature's softer underjaw. It was not flashy. It was physics. The third layer was the mind. This was the hardest. Senku insisted Naruto learn the principles behind everything they built: basic mechanics, leverage, chemical ratios for the flashbangs. If you understand why the bomb works, you can improvise when you don't have one, Senku drilled him. If you understand tension and compression, you can see the weak point in a structure or a stance. Naruto, who had always powered through problems with guts and gallons of chakra, found this mental discipline agonizing. He'd stare at a diagram of force vectors, his mind wandering to the silent, watching pressure in his gut. One evening, after a particularly frustrating session on pressure and fulcrums, he retreated to the river. He sat, not meditating, just feeling the cool air on his face, the solid earth beneath him. He let his awareness sink inward, past the tired muscles, past the simmering anxiety, toward the humming void. He didn't speak. He simply presented. He focused on the memory sensation of the green light, the corrupting fire, the decay zone. He focused on the grinding voice in the forest. Why he man? He focused on Tsukasa's cold, recalculating gaze. He bundled all these fears, these horrors, and mentally held them out into the darkness of the void. Look, he thought, not with words, but with raw feeling. This is the world now. This is what I have to fight. I'm using rocks and fire and tricks. I'm learning about levers. I'm so small here. The hum in the void deepened. The pressure shifted. The single, watching eye in his mind seemed to blink. And then, a new sensation bloomed, not a thought, not an image, but a texture. It was the feeling of immense, patient, volcanic heat. The feeling of a mountain that knew it could endure any storm because it was the foundation the storm broke upon. It was an echo of Kurama's essence, but stripped of malice, stripped of the Ninetales narrative. It was just durability. The power of something that simply was, and could not be unmade. It wasn't chakra. It wasn't something he could use. It was a lesson. A reminder from the deepest part of his own soul, where the fox's nature had been woven into his. You are not just the flame, the feeling seemed to say. You are also the mountain. Stop trying to burn everything. Sometimes, you just have to stand. He opened his eyes, breath coming slow. The fear was still there, the cold cyst in his gut still ached. But beneath it, for the first time, he felt a bedrock of something that wasn't desperation. It was resolve. Not the loud, shouting resolve of his youth, but the quiet, obdurate resolve of a river stone. He returned to camp with a new calm. When Senku quizzed him the next day on the tensile strength of vine rope versus leather cord, Naruto didn't get frustrated. He asked why. He followed the logic chain. He was starting to think like a scientist, not just a weapon user. The final test of Project Shinobi Optimization came unexpectedly. A hunting party, led by Kahaku, was ambushed not by Tsukasa, but by a new horror. They called it a stone slitherer. It was a serpentine creature, 20 feet long, its body composed of interlocking, grinding segments of petrified wood and stone. It moved with a horrific, jerking peristalsis, and its maw was a spiraling drill of fossilized teeth. The hunters were pinned on a rocky outcrop, their spears doing little more than scratching its stony hide. A runner made it back to the kingdom, gasping the news. Naruto moved. He didn't ask for permission. He grabbed his kit, modular knife, pry head attached, a pouch of slag caltrops, 3 egg flashbangs, a coil of the strongest vine rope. He found them on the outcrop, Kahaku holding the high point, her spear tip chipped, the slither recoiling below, ready to crush the rock and bring them down. Naruto, fall back. Its height is too hard. Kahaku shouted. Naruto didn't answer. He assessed. Senki's lessons clicked. The creature's movement was a series of leverage points, each segment pushing the next. Its weakness wasn't its hide, it was its joints. He scrambled up a nearby petrified tree. He tied one end of his vine rope to a thick branch, the other end around his waist. He took a flashbang, armed it, and threw it not at the creature, but at the base of the outcrop, right below its head. Crack! The sound and smoke startled the slitherer, making it rear back, exposing the softer, grinding joint between its first and second segment. Naruto leaped from the tree, swinging on his vine rope. He dropped the slag caltrops in a shower around the creature's midsection, not to hurt it, but to create an uneven, painful surface for its underbelly. As it flinched, he swung past its head, and with all his momentum and the optimized biomechanics Kahaku had beaten into him, he drove the pry-bar head of his tool into the exposed joint, using his own body weight as the lever. Crunch grind. The sound was hideous. The pry-bar bit deep, jamming the joint. The stone slitherer thrashed, its rhythmic movement catastrophically disrupted. It writhed, segments grinding out of sync, its own immense weight and power turning against it. With a final, shuddering crack, it collapsed into a pile of disconnected stone segments, still twitching but harmless. Naruto landed, panting, his rope swinging. He looked at his hands, at the simple tool that had felled a monster. He hadn't used a drop of offensive chakra. He'd used a swing, a noise, some jagged scrap, and a lever. Kahaku stared at him, then at the dissembled creature. A slow, fierce grin spread across her face. It was the grin of a hunter who has just seen a new, beautiful trick. You used its strength against it. I used a fulcrum, Naruto corrected, the Senkuism coming naturally. He pulled his pry-bar free. It was bent. He looked at it, then at Kahaku's grin, and for the first time in what felt like centuries, he laughed. It was a short, sharp, real sound in the silent, predatory forest. When they returned, Senku examined the bent tool and the report of the fight. He didn't praise. He nodded, once. Acceptable application of theory. The pry head needs a harder alloy. We'll work on it. That night, as Naruto cleaned his kit, the void within hummed, a low, almost approving frequency. The red eye watched, but the pressure felt less like observation and more like alignment. The fox recognized the cunning, the efficient use of force. It was a language the beast understood far better than noble speeches. Naruto Uzumaki was being reforged. Not in the fires of the Nine-Tails chakra, but in the practical crucible of survival. He was becoming something new, a shinobi whose power was not in limitless energy, but in an unbreakable will, a cunning mind, and the unwavering support of the village he had chosen. He was learning to be the mountain so that when the storm of Tsukasa finally broke, he would not be blown away. He would be the thing the storm shattered against. Chapter 14. The Price of a Secret. The bent pry bar head sat on Senku's work table like a challenge. The alloy problem was a distraction he couldn't afford, but one he couldn't ignore. Stronger metal required better carbon control, higher temperatures, maybe even a flux to remove impurities. It was a rabbit hole of metallurgy when their time was sand slipping through an hourglass. Yet, the world's accelerating strangeness forced their hand. The liquid metal ooze from the petrified streams, Senku dubbed it quicksilver, was a tantalizing, deadly shortcut. In a controlled test, a drop of it alloyed with molten iron produced a metal that was lighter, harder, and held an edge that gleamed with a sickly rainbow sheen. It was also, Senku discovered after a week of observing the test ingot, subtly unstable. It seemed to vibrate, emitting a faint, subaudible hum that attracted grave crickets from 50 yards away. It's energetically resonant, Senku muttered, peering at the ingot through a lens of clear quartz they'd polished. The quicksilver carries a trace signature of the petrification field. Forge it into a weapon, and you're not just carrying metal. You're carrying a beacon. Naruto hefted the test dagger made from the alloy. It was beautifully balanced, sharper than anything they'd made. It also felt faintly warm, and holding it made the cold cyst in his gut twitch in recognition. So it's a trade-off. A better blade that screams "eat me" to every monster in the woods. Precisely, Senku said. A calculated risk. For a tool of last resort. While Senku wrestled with corrupted chemistry, the human element of their war took a sudden, volatile turn. Maz, the strategist, had been a model prisoner, silent, observant, healing. She was allowed limited, guarded movement within a small compound. Kahaku, her primary guard, maintained a cold, professional distance. That changed one afternoon when a sudden, freak hailstorm pelted the kingdom. It wasn't normal hail. The stones were small, perfectly round, and tinged the same faint green as the decay zone. Where they struck, they didn't melt, they left tiny, gray pockmarks of instant desiccation. The camp scrambled for cover. In the chaos, a hailstone shattered the thin wooden roof of Maz's enclosure. She didn't try to escape. She stood in the open, staring at the green-tinged ice marbles hitting the ground around her, her one good eye wide with something beyond fear, with a profound, personal terror. Kahaku, seeing her exposed, did something impulsive. She grabbed Maz's arm and yanked her into the relative safety of a nearby storage hut. It was an act of basic humanity, not trust. Inside the cramped, dark space, smelling of dried herbs and clay, the two women faced each other, the drumming of the aberrant hail on the hide roof the only sound. Maz was trembling, her calculated composure shattered. "You've seen it before," Kahaku stated, her voice flat. "The green ice." Maz nodded, a short, jerky motion. She wrapped her arms around herself. "At the beginning, when Tsukasa-sama was first building his strength. We found a place, a crater where the light first fell, we think. Things grow there. Wrong things. The air is cold. And sometimes, it rains this." She looked at Kahaku, her gaze naked. "He made us collect it. To study. He said understanding the divine punishment was the first step to wielding its purity." A bitter, broken sound escaped her. "There is no purity. Only corruption. Your shinobi proved that." This was a crack. A fracture in the armor of Tsukasa's ideology, and it ran right through his most intelligent follower. Kahaku said nothing, just listened, the hunter waiting for the prey to step into the clear. "He is not what you think," Maz whispered, the words spilling out now, pressured by the memory of the green hail. "He is not just strong. He is empty. He lost everything in the old world. His family, his future. The petrification didn't frighten him. It felt like justice. A clean slate. He wanted to protect that slate, to keep it clean of the weakness that ruined the beforetime." She met Kahaku's eyes. "But your shinobi, he didn't just defy the slate. He scribbled on it with something worse. Tsukasa-sama's dream isn't broken. It's infected. And now he doesn't want to protect the new world. He wants to control the infection. To own the power that defile it. He will tear your village apart, not for justice, but for the key to the corruption. He will become the very thing he sought to erase." The hail stopped as suddenly as it began. Sunlight speared through the cracks in the hut. The moment of vulnerability passed. Maz's face hardened again, the shutters coming down. But the words hung in the herb-scented air. Kahaku reported everything to Senku and Naruto. The revelation was a tactical goldmine and a psychological nightmare. "He's radicalizing further," Senku mused, tapping a diagram of the quicksilver alloy. "Moving from ideologue to pragmatic absolutist. More dangerous, but potentially more predictable. His target is unequivocally you, Naruto. And his method will be overwhelming force aimed at capture, not just destruction. Naruto felt the weight of it. He was a prize. A resource. The thought made his skin crawl. We can use this. Lure him. Set a trap. With you as the bait? Kahaku's voice was sharp. Ma's warning was not a gift of strategy. It was a plea. She fears what he will become if he succeeds. All the more reason to end it, Naruto said, his voice quiet with that new, mountain-like resolve. But not with me just standing there. We need to make the bait into a trap itself. The plan that coalesced was audacious, reliant on everything they had learned and built. It was called Operation Lodestone. The premise was simple: they would let Tsukasa believe he was launching a surprise attack to capture Naruto. And they would turn the entire kingdom of science into a layered, lethal puzzle box. Key to the plan was the Quicksilver alloy. They would forge one single, perfect item from it, not a weapon, but a decoy. A lifelike statue of Naruto, crafted by Yuzuriha's artistic hands over a heartwood frame, its surface sheathed in thin, hammered alloy. It would resonate with the same aberrant energy signature as Naruto's own corrupted chakra, acting as a perfect electromagnetic decoy for any scout using sensitive equipment or instinct. The real Naruto would be elsewhere, hidden. The rest of the plan was a series of interlocking death traps, each a lesson from their struggles. The river gorge was re-engineered with pivot logs and counterweights to create collapsing walls. The pony cart, repaired and fitted with a new, massive spring, was not a shock weapon but a remote-controlled battering ram on a hidden track. The flashbangs were mass-produced and rigged to tripwires in complex sequences Senku mapped out like a chemical formula. And Naruto's role? He was the reset button. The hidden piece that would move only when the trap was fully sprung, to take down the primary target, Tsukasa himself. Preparations were a round-the-clock frenzy of controlled paranoia. The constant activity kept the deeper fear at bay, the fear of the Y-man's voice, of the moving stone, of the green hail. They were fighting a human war on the skin of a dying planet. One night, a week before they estimated Tsukasa would have regrouped, Naruto found Kahaku by the river, not sharpening her spear, but carefully painting the final details on the alloy skin of his decoy. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her touch surprisingly delicate as she layered ash and plant dyes to mimic the whisker marks on his cheeks, the sun-bleached hue of his hair. He looks grumpier than me, Naruto commented, leaning against the doorway of the workshop. She didn't jump. It is hard to capture your particular brand of stubborn idiocy in metal, she replied without looking up. He smiled, but it faded. Kahaku. If this goes wrong, if the trap fails and they get past us, I want you to take Senku and the others and run. Use the hidden paths to the south. Find that lamentation hamlet. Now she looked at him, her eyes hard. We have discussed this. No stupid strategies. This isn't a strategy. It's an order. From your Hokage. The old title felt strange on his tongue, but the authority behind it was real. This village, you all are the future. Not me. I'm a relic with a curse. You protect the future. That's the mission. She stood, wiping her hands on a rag. She walked up to him, stopping close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her blue eyes. You are wrong, she said, her voice low and fierce. You are not a relic. You are the bridge. Between the old world's knowledge and this one's survival. Between Senku's mind and Taiju's strength. She hesitated, between a past you mourn and a future you are building. You do not get to order us to abandon our bridge. She poked a finger into his chest. We stand. Together. You will stop giving orders to leave. Or I will have Chrome tie you to the pony cart and launch you into the river. Her words, so blunt and fierce, shattered the last of his Hokage formality. He saw not a subordinate, but a partner. A pillar of this new world as unshakable as he was trying to be. He saw the future, and it was standing right in front of him, covered in paint and refusing to back down. He didn't have words. He just nodded, a slow, deep acknowledgement. She searched his face, then gave a single, satisfied nod in return. She turned back to the decoy. Now go away. I need to get the shape of your nose right. It is very distracting. As he left, the hum in the void within him shifted. The pressure wasn't just observing or aligning. For a fleeting second, it felt almost like approval. The fox, the ultimate survivor, understood standing your ground. It understood protecting your den. The secret was out, not the secret of the trap, but the secret of their unity. Tsukasa was coming for a key, a weapon, a piece of the old world. He would find, instead, a village that had become a single, complex, defiant organism. And at its heart, a man who was no longer just a shinobi or a vessel, but the living will of the bridge between two ages. The final piece fell into place 2 days later. Chrome, monitoring with his sound catcher from a distant ridge, came sprinting back, his face pale. They're here. A mile out. A lot of them. And he has something new. Something big. I heard it. A sound like grinding rocks and a deep thump thump thump. The description meant nothing to them. But the dread was universal. Senku took a deep breath, his eyes sweeping over their prepared kingdom, their traps, their people. All positions. Operation Lodestone is active. 10 billion%, let's see if our science can break a god complex. Naruto touched the cool, rainbow-sheened metal of his decoy's cheek. It hummed faintly, a siren song for the storm. He then turned and vanished into the predetermined hiding spot, his new kit secure, his mind clear, the mountain resolve solid in his chest. The wait was over. The price of their secret, of their unity, was about to be paid in blood and ingenuity. The kingdom of science held its breath. The sound of breaking. The grinding, thump 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 sound Chrome had reported wasn't an engine. It was a war machine. From his hidden vantage point within a hollowed, camouflaged heartwood stump, Naruto watched through a narrow slit as Tsukasa's force emerged from the tree line. The front ranks were familiar, hard-eyed young warriors with forged metal spears and shields of layered wood and hide. But behind them, pulled by a team of 10 straining men, was the source of the sound. It was a stone ram. A monstrous contraption built around the petrified skull and spine of some colossal, long-dead beast, maybe a prehistoric elephant or a creature from a world before the petrification. The skull, solid stone, had been sheathed in plates of beaten iron, forming a brutal, sloping battering ram. The spine acted as the main beam, and the thump 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 came from massive, log-wheeled axles turning under its immense weight. It was a symbol of Tsukasa's new philosophy, using the petrified bones of the old world as a bludgeon to destroy the new. And standing atop the ram's iron-plated skull, surveying the kingdom of science like a conquering general from a bygone age, was Tsukasa. He wore no armor beyond his simple hides, but his presence was a heavier metal than any plate. His eyes scanned the silent, seemingly deserted village, the water wheel, the furnace. He was looking for the anomaly. Hyoga walked beside the ram, his mace resting on his shoulder, a titan escorting a greater titan. Maz was nowhere to be seen, likely kept at the rear, her loyalty now suspect. They've fortified, Hyoga's voice rumbled across the clearing. No matter. The ram breaks all walls. Tsukasa didn't answer. His gaze lingered on the central clearing, on the figure standing motionless in the open, backlit by the morning sun, the quicksilver decoy. There, Tsukasa said, his voice calm, carrying the key. Take it. Unharmed. Crush everything else. The command was given. The front-rank warriors advanced in a shield wall, a slow, grinding advance toward the gorge entrance. The stone ram began its ponderous roll forward, guided by its team, aiming straight for the most direct path to the decoy, a path that would take it right through the heart of the kingdom's prepared defenses. Phase 1, the funnel. As the shield wall entered the river gorge, Chrome, hidden on a high ledge, pulled a lever. A series of pivot logs, cleverly counterweight, swung down from the cliff faces. They didn't hit the warriors. They hit the ground behind them, collapsing the path and cutting off their retreat. The warriors were now trapped in the narrow defile, their neat formation compressed. From above, Taiju and other defenders let loose. Not with bombs. With nets. Heavy, weighted nets made of vine and fibrous bark rained down, tangling the shield wall, turning it into a struggling, immobilized mass. The first wave was neutralized, not with blood, but with entrapment. Tsukasa watched, unmoved. A delay. Hyoga. Hyoga roared and charged ahead of the stone ram, aiming to clear the nets with sheer force. As he entered the gorge, Senku, from his command post, focused his lens. Thwomp. The flash powder charge ignited, not at the entrance, but inside the gorge, reflecting off polished sheets of mica they'd embedded in the walls. The blinding light filled the entire narrow space. Hyoga bellowed, stumbling, temporarily blinded. Phase 2, the hammer. Now, Taiju. Senku's voice crackled through a series of hollowed log speaking tubes they'd rigged. From a hidden side passage, Taiju emerged, not with a weapon, but pushing a heavy, log-filled cart onto a raised track. He released a catch. The cart, propelled by gravity, rolled down the track and smashed into the side of the blinded, struggling Hyoga with the sound of a falling tree. It didn't kill him, nothing could, but it knocked him off his feet and into the river with a colossal splash, his mace flying from his grip. The stone ram, meanwhile, had reached the first major obstacle, a palisade wall blocking the main path. The driver team heaved. The iron-sheathed stone skull drew back on its massive suspension of sinew and wood. Thoom. The impact shook the ground. The sturdy wall splintered, but it didn't fully break. It was designed not to hold, but to guide. The impact shifted the ram slightly to the left, onto a path of carefully arranged, loose round stones. The massive wheels lost traction. The ram slewed, grinding to a halt, its left side sinking into a concealed pit that wasn't deep enough to trap it, but deep enough to immobilize it. The driver team scrambled, shouting. From his stump, Naruto watched, his heart pounding a steady, slow rhythm. The plan was working. They were dismantling the invasion piece by piece, using trickery and terrain. Then Tsukasa moved. He leaped from the immobilized ram, not with Hyoga's brute force, but with a terrifying, liquid grace. He landed silently and began to walk, not toward the struggling ram or the trapped warriors, but straight for the decoy in the clearing. He moved through the kingdom like a ghost, ignoring the chaos, his eyes fixed on his target. He was bypassing every trap. He had seen through the diversion of the nets, the flash, the hammer. He understood that the key was the only thing that mattered. Phase 3. Senko's voice held a note of urgency. Activate pony cart. Divert him. From a hidden gully, the pony cart shot forth, its spring screaming. This time, Chrome was the driver, and its passenger was Kahaku, armed with her spear and a satchel of flashbangs. They aimed not to hit Tsukasa, but to cut him off, to force him to engage. Tsukasa didn't break stride. As the cart hurtled toward him, he seemed to flow around its path, his body contorting with impossible flexibility. He reached out as it passed, his hand not striking Kahaku, but snatching the satchel of flashbangs from her grasp with a movement too fast to follow. He threw the satchel aside without looking and kept walking. Kahaku leaped from the slowing cart, spear thrusting. Tsukasa parried the strike with his forearm, the impact making a sound like an axe hitting hard oak. He didn't counterattack. He simply shoved her aside with a force that sent her tumbling, then continued. He was a force of nature. Their science, their traps, their best warrior, they were distractions to him. He was a scalpel heading for the heart. Naruto knew it was time. The decoy had done its job, drawing Tsukasa into the open, away from his main force. Now, the real bait had to strike. He triggered the release on his stump. A hidden door swung open. He stepped out, into the open, between Tsukasa and the shimmering decoy. Tsukasa stopped. For the first time, his serene mask showed a flicker of emotion, mild surprise, then intense, focused interest. He looked from the decoy to Naruto, understanding dawning. A shell, Tsukasa murmured. You hid your resonance within it. Clever. He looked at Naruto, truly seeing him. You are thinner than I expected. The power you wield, it costs you. Everything worth having does, Naruto said, his voice steady. He held his modular knife, the standard iron blade attached. Tsukasa smiled, a small, cold thing. Philosophy from a relic. I will have your power, Naruto Uzumaki. I will learn how you break the world's laws. And I will use it to build a world with no need for tricks, or traps, or weaklings huddling behind science. He didn't assume a stance. He just was. The threat radiated from him like heat from a forge. Naruto breathed in, centering himself. The mountain resolve. The lessons. He had no chakra for a prolonged fight. He had one shot. He had to make Tsukasa commit. He attacked. Not with the body flicker, but with the optimized, economical style Kahaku and Senku had drilled into him. A low slash, a feint, a pivot to strike at the knee. Tsukasa dodged the first, blocked the second with a forearm that felt like iron, and caught Naruto's wrist on the third, stopping the blade an inch from his leg. His grip was crushing. You fight well. For a man using a child's tools. He twisted. Pain lanced up Naruto's arm. He dropped the knife. Tsukasa released him and delivered a palm strike to his chest. It wasn't a killing blow. It was a measuring strike. Naruto flew back 10 feet, the air driven from his lungs. He hit the ground, rolled, came up gasping. His ribs screamed. Tsukasa was pulling his punches. He wanted him alive, functional. Good. That was the flaw. Tsukasa closed in. Show me the power that corrupts the green light. Show me the stasis. So he knew its name. Maz had told him everything. Naruto pushed himself up. He raised a hand, focusing. He let the cold, heavy feeling of the stasis resonate in his palm, let the air around his hand grow still and dim. He was putting on a show. Tsukasa watched, fascinated, a scientist observing a dangerous specimen. Yes. That frequency. The negation of motion. How do you focus it? How do you control the decay? He took another step, now within arm's reach, his guard slightly lowered, his mind consumed by the puzzle. Naruto let the stasis energy around his hand flicker and die. He sagged, as if exhausted. I can't. Not again. It's too much. A flicker of disappointment crossed Tsukasa's face. Then it hardened. Then you are of no use. I will dissect you until I find the source. He reached out to grab Naruto's throat. That was the moment. The commitment. Naruto didn't dodge. He leaned into the grab. As Tsukasa's hand closed around his neck, Naruto's own hand shot up and clamped over Tsukasa's wrist and forearm. Not to break the grip. To hold him there. And then, Naruto did something he had never attempted, something born of his understanding of resonance, of opposition, of the mountain's patience and the fox's volatile heat. He didn't release the stasis. He reached into the cold cyst in his gut and pulled. Not a thread, but the entire, searing, unstable slag of it, the corrupted energy left from his fight with the green light. And he didn't project it outward. He sent it inward, down his own arms, into the point of contact with Tsukasa. But he didn't try to infect Tsukasa with stasis. He did the opposite. He took the cold, stagnant frequency of petrification and, using every ounce of his will, his memories of life and heat, he inverted it on a microscopic, personal scale. Just as he had with the green light, but contained, focused, a pinpoint of catastrophic reaction. He created a therapeutic resonance cascade. He forced the energy of absolute stillness to violently reject itself upon contact with a living system as dense and vibrant as Tsukasa's. The effect was not decay. It was not stasis. It was overclocking. Tsukasa's eyes flew wide. A jolt, like a seizure of pure, unfiltered vitality, ripped through him. Every muscle in his body locked into hyperextension at once. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. His synapses fired in a blinding, painful strobe. For a 3 full seconds, the man who represented perfected, controlled strength was a prisoner of his own body's rebellion, vibrating with uncontrollable, self-destructive energy. He couldn't move. He couldn't think. He could only be, in the most agonizingly intense way possible. It was the opening. From the ground where she had fallen, Kahaku, who had never taken her eyes off the fight, acted. She drew back her spear, not for a throw, but a vault. She used it to propel herself forward in a desperate, sliding charge across the dirt. As she slid, she scooped up Naruto's dropped modular knife. She reached them as Tsukasa shuddered in Naruto's grip. She didn't aim for the heart, the head. She aimed for the ultimate symbol of his physical philosophy, his strength. With a cry that was pure, focused fury, she drove the iron knife not into flesh, but into the joint of Tsukasa's shoulder, the complex nexus of muscle and tendon that powered his godlike arm. The blade, driven by her momentum and hate, bit deep. There was a wet, tearing sound, distinct from the crack of bone or the slice of flesh. It was the sound of a cable snapping. Tsukasa's overclocked body didn't even feel it at first. Then the feedback hit. His arm, his perfect weapon, went limp and heavy. The hyper-energy backlashed, short-circuiting through the injury. He threw his head back and screamed. It was not a sound of pain, but of absolute, universe-shattering rage and disbelief. The sound of a god discovering he could bleed. He released Naruto, staggering back, clutching his ruined shoulder, his face a mask of twisted fury and agony. The therapeutic resonance faded, leaving him weak, dizzy, and maimed. Naruto collapsed to his knees, utterly drained. The cyst in his gut was gone, burned out in the cascade. He felt hollow, light, and terribly cold. He had spent the last of his corrupted power. Tsukasa stood, swaying, his one good hand pressed over the gushing wound. He looked from his bloody hand to Kahaku, who stood panting, spear ready, to Naruto on the ground. The serene certainty was gone, replaced by a howling, hateful void. This changes nothing, he gasped, blood flecking his lips. The strong endure. I will return. And I will burn this clever little village to the ground. But the threat was empty. His army was trapped or scattered. His ram was stuck. His champion was floundering in the river. And he, the invincible Tsukasa, was bleeding out from a wound delivered by a girl with a knife. He turned and fled, a stumbling, broken run into the forest, leaving a trail of crimson on the moss. Silence descended, broken only by the moans of trapped warriors and the distant splash of Hyuga finally hauling himself from the river. They had done it. They had broken the empire. But as Naruto looked at Kahaku's grim, triumphant face, and then at the retreating back of the most dangerous man he had ever known, he knew one thing for certain. They had not killed the dream. They had only wounded the dreamer. And wounded dreams have a terrible way of festering. Chapter 16. The Bridge and the Beacon. Victory tasted of dust, blood, and a creeping, hollow exhaustion. The stone kingdom of science stood, but it was a landscape of scars. The palisade was splintered. The river gorge was a mess of tangled nets and groaning prisoners. The air still hummed with the fading echo of Tsukasa's shattered scream. They had won the battle. But the war, Naruto knew in his bones, had just changed shape. The immediate aftermath was a blur of triage and containment. The trapped Tsukasa warriors, disarmed and demoralized by the flight of their bleeding god, offered little resistance. They were corralled, their wounds tended with the same pragmatic efficiency as their own people's. Hyuga, hauled from the river, was bound with enough fine rope to restrain a bull, his cold fury simmering behind silent, hate-filled eyes. Maz was found at the rear of the enemy column, unbound but under guard, her expression unreadable. Senku moved through it all like a ghost, his usual manic energy replaced by a deep, vibrating stillness. He wasn't cataloging the victory, he was staring at the spot where Tsukasa had bled, then at Naruto, who sat propped against a log, looking more drained than after the green light. The energy signature you emitted, Senku said, kneeling beside him, his voice hushed. It wasn't stasis. It was a forced harmonic induction into a living system. You overloaded his bioelectrical field. That's not a weapon. That's a medical atrocity. It worked, Naruto croaked, his throat raw. 10 billion% it worked, Senku agreed, his eyes wide behind imaginary lenses. And it almost killed you. Your internal energy is reading as flatlined. You've burned out the hybridized petrification energy, but you've also scorched your own pathways. He pressed a hand to Naruto's forehead. You're running on willpower and stubbornness. The metaphysical equivalent of a corpse with a lit fuse. Kahaku brought water. Her hands were steady, but her eyes kept darting to the forest edge where Tsukasa had vanished. The blow she'd struck had been necessary, surgical, perfect. Yet, the act of crippling a demigod had left a shadow on her hunter's soul. She had crossed a line, from defending her home to actively breaking a symbol of a world's order. He will heal, she said, not looking at Naruto. A wound like that, it will weaken that arm, but it will not stop him. It will make him desperate. More dangerous. Naruto nodded. The cold cyst was gone, but the void inside felt different. Not empty. Cleansed. And in that clean, silent space, the low hum of Kurama's presence was no longer a distant pressure. It was a presence, vast and waiting, like a sun resting just below the horizon. The eye was wide open. It had seen the fight. It had felt the desperate, brilliant corruption and the final, purging burn. And it was interested. For 3 days, the kingdom licked its wounds and held its breath. Scouts reported Tsukasa's trail a erratic, bloody path leading not back to his territory, but deeper into the petrified wilderness, toward the mountains. He was not regrouping. He was fleeing. Or he was seeking something. On the 4th day, the sky spoke. It began at noon. The ever-present silence of the post-moon world was broken by a deep, subaudible vibration that made the teeth ache and the river water shiver in its bed. Then, the voice returned, but changed. The grinding, sorrowful why, man, was gone. In its place was a clear, cold, and terrifyingly direct transmission. It didn't come from the forest. It seemed to emanate from the air itself, from the stones, from inside their own skulls. Localized entropy variant detected. Source, biological. Coordinates locked. Paradigm deviation unacceptable. Initiating corrective protocol. The words were not in any language, and yet they were understood by every living thing in the clearing. Birds fell dead from the sky. Insects shriveled. The defenders clutched their heads, groaning in pain and disorientation. Senku stared upward, his face bone-white. It's not a lament. It's a system alert. The Y-Man isn't a god or a monster. It's a machine. A planetary-scale auto-defense system. And you, just showed up on its radar as a bug. A bug that changed the code. The ground trembled. From the direction of the mountains, a pillar of pure, uncorrupted green light lanced into the sky, so bright it bleached the color from the world. It was not the wide, descending wave. It was a focused beam. A targeting laser. It was aimed at the kingdom of science. Panic, pure and primal, seized everyone. This was not an enemy they could trap or outthink. This was an extermination. Naruto pushed himself to his feet. His body felt like glass, but his mind was clearer than it had been since he arrived. He looked at the terror on Yuzuria's face, at Krone's furious despair, at Taiju's helpless confusion, at Kahaku's grim, accepting resolve as she gripped her spear, ready to die fighting the sky. He looked at Senku, who was frantically calculating, his eyes darting from the light to his tools to Naruto, searching for a science that didn't exist for this. The bridge. He was the bridge. Between their world and his. Between science and chakra. Between life and the stillness that sought to erase it. The hum in the void within him swelled to a roar. The red eye was no longer watching. It was beckoning. Naruto understood. The fox wasn't offering power. It was offering a conduit. Kurama was a creature of vast, chaotic, living energy. The antithesis of the petrification's sterile order. But Naruto's own channels were scorched, his unique hybrid energy spent. There was only one way. He had to open the gate. Not to draw out the fox's chakra, but to let the fox's essence, its sheer, violent, aliveness, flow through him and into the world. To be a lightning rod for life in the face of the machine's deadening order. It would burn what was left of him to ash. It might unleash the fox entirely. It was the end of Naruto Uzumaki as anything but a sacrifice. He met Kahaku's eyes across the clearing. He saw her realize his intention. She took a step forward, her mouth opening to shout, to forbid him. He gave her a small, sad, genuine smile, the old, bright Naruto smile, untouched by stone or shadow. He shook his head once. Then he turned and began to run. Not away from the green beam, but toward the mountains, toward its source. He was a flicker of orange and gold against the dead green light, a tiny, defiant spark racing to meet the inferno. Naruto! Kahaku's scream tore after him. He didn't look back. He poured every last scrap of his will, his love for this strange new village, his memory of Konoha, into a single, final act. He didn't reach for chakra. He reached for the seal. In his mind's eye, he went to the vast, clean void. He stood before the gate that held the nine tails. But he didn't see a cage. He saw a dam, holding back a sea of roaring, crimson vitality. Hey, furball, he thought, his mental voice calm. You wanted to see this world? Let's show it what a real mess looks like. He placed his hands on the mental seal. And instead of tightening it, instead of bargaining, he pulled. He didn't break it. He opened it. Just a crack. A soundless, psychic detonation ripped through him. It wasn't chakra flooding his coils. It was something more fundamental. The concept of Kurama, its rage, its pride, its endless, stubborn will to exist erupted into the petrified world's sterile energy field. Naruto's body became a beacon. Not of golden chakra, but of shimmering, chaotic crimson light. It wasn't a cloak. It was an aura, a corona of violent life that ripped at the fabric of the silent world. The grass at his feet didn't burn, it grew, mutated, twisted into vibrant, excessive shapes. The air crackled with ozone and the scent of hot copper and wild sage. The green targeting beam from the mountains shifted, tracking him instantly. It was drawn to the anomaly, the massive life signature he had become. He stood on a high ridge, between the kingdom and the mountains, a lone figure wreathed in a storm of red light. He raised his arms, not in defense, but in invitation. Come on, he roared, his voice amplified by the energy shrieking through him, tearing at the cells of his throat. You want order? I am chaos. You want silence? I am the noise. The green beam fired. A column of perfect, annihilating stillness slammed into the maelstrom of crimson life. The collision made no sound. It created a sphere of silent, blinding white negation where they met. The world within that sphere ceased to obey physics. Stone turned to liquid, then to gas, then to light. The very air fractured. Naruto was at the epicenter. He felt his body unraveling. He wasn't being petrified. He was being unmade, his existence debated by two opposing fundamental forces. But he held. Not with strength, but with identity. He was Naruto Uzumaki. He was a shinobi of Konoha. He was the Hokage. He was a friend. He was a bridge. He was a fool who never gave up. He was the vessel of the nine tails. He was a man who loved ramen. He was all these things, a tangled, messy, beautiful knot of contradictions, and he refused to be simplified into stillness. The crimson aura flared, fed by the infinite, rebellious will of the fox and his own impossible stubbornness. It didn't defeat the green beam. It argued with it. It flooded the sterile order with nonsense, with emotion, with memory, with the glorious, annoying complexity of being alive. The green beam flickered. The machine, the Y-Man, encountering not a system error but a screaming, vibrant antithesis to its entire purpose, hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, the beam fractured. It didn't vanish. It split into 1,000 smaller, weaker strands of light that scattered harmlessly across the sky, fizzling out like dying embers. The silent white sphere collapsed. On the ridge, the crimson aura winked out. Naruto Uzumaki fell. He did not turn to stone. He did not decay. He lay broken, his body a map of hairline fractures, his eyes open, staring at the sky. He was empty. The conduit was shattered. The bridge was burned. But in the deep silence that followed, a true silence, empty of the voice, empty of the moans, empty of everything but the wind in the distant, terrified breathing of the people behind him, a single, profound change echoed across the petrified world. The feeling of watching dread, of static malevolence that had soaked the air for millennia, lifted. It didn't vanish, but it receded, like a fever breaking. The Y-Man's voice was gone. The system had encountered an irresolvable paradox and had, for now, gone quiet. In the void within Naruto, there was no hum. No I. Just a vast, warm, respectful darkness. And a single, faint, familiar grumble, echoing from a depth that was now a part of the landscape of his soul, not a prison within it. Poof. Not bad, brat. Then, silence. Kahaku was the first to reach him. She fell to her knees beside his still form, her hands hovering over him, afraid to touch. He was breathing. Shallow, ragged, but breathing. Senku arrived next, his instruments useless, his science failing. He just stared, his genius humbled by the scale of the sacrifice he was witnessing. Naruto's eyes focused, with immense effort, on Kahaku's face. He tried to speak. Only a whisper of air came out. She leaned down, her ear almost to his lips. He gathered the last molecule of his will. Told you, he breathed, the ghost of his grin touching his cracked lips. Believe it. Then his eyes closed. He did not wake. For days, he lingered in a state Senku could only describe as metaphysical coma. His body was healing, with impossible slowness. The fractures sealed. The burns faded. But he slept. The world, however, was waking. With the Y-Man's active presence muted, the petrified forest began a slow, tentative thaw. At the edges of the decay zone, a single, brave blade of normal, green grass pushed through the gray powder. The stone slitherer segments ceased their twitching. The haunting bioluminescence in the stones faded. Tsukasa was gone, his empire in ruins, his dream infected by a poison called mercy and a wound delivered by a girl. Weeks later, on a morning when the sun felt warm for the first time, Naruto Uzumaki opened his eyes. He was in the lab hut. Sunlight streamed through the open window. He could hear the whoosh clunk of the bellows, the sound of Chrome and Taiju arguing, Yuzuriha singing softly. He felt light. Empty of power, empty of the cold, empty of the fox's roar. He felt like a cleared field after a fire. Barren, but ready. The door opened. Kahaku stood there, a bowl of steaming broth in her hands. She saw his open eyes. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She just stood there for a long moment, her face doing a complicated, beautiful thing that was part relief, part anger, part wonder. Then she walked in, set the bowl down, and without a word, punched him hard in the arm. Ow. What was that for? For being an idiot, she said, her voice thick. For running. For smiling. She sat on the stool beside his bed, picked up the bowl, and shoved it toward him. Now eat. You are skin and bones. And the village needs its bridge. He took the bowl. The broth smelled of herbs and meat. It was the best thing he'd ever smelled. He looked out the window. At the water wheel turning. At the new, green grass at the edge of the decay zone. At the people, his people, moving in the sunlight. He was not the seventh Hokage of Konoha. That world was gone. He was not the vessel of the Nine Tails. That power was spent, its nature forever changed by the petrified world. He was Naruto Uzumaki. He was a shinobi of the Stone Age. He was a scientist of survival. He was a bridge between what was lost and what could be. And he was home. He took a sip of the broth, and for the first time in 3,700 years, the taste of the future was warm, and salty, and alive.